is Notsam Wrestling.
Introducing your host from New York, here is Sam Roberts.
When Nikki Cross and Alexa Bliss got together, it will look like one of those stereotypical wrestling relationships where you were going to end with mean girl Alexa Bliss stabbing naive, I just need a friend, Nikki Cross in the back. Like, that seemed like where it was going. And I bet that was the original plan. But I believe that people saw the chemistry of Nikki Cross and Alexa Bliss together and just decided to keep them together as a unit. And I think for a period of time, that was a good thing. I think they were a good pick for a period of time as the women's tag champions. But realistically, they haven't really been doing anything. And the end of their run as tag champions was not, a moment of bliss. It was one thing when it was like a heel talk show. But it literally just became a platform to do a promo on. There wasn't anything, I don't think, to it that made it unique. There just wasn't a lot going on with Alexa Bliss and Nikki Cross. And that says nothing about Alexa Bliss or Nikki Cross. Alexa Bliss, and here's something that I think people have forgotten about Alexa Bliss. Alexa Bliss, recently, only 2 years ago, was on this run where she was knocking home run after home run after home run. Every ball that was pitched to her went out of the park. And that will conclude my baseball references for the day. This is not Sam Wrestling, not Sam Pretends to Watch Baseball. But Alexa Bliss went on this run as women's champion that I don't even know if you guys remember. I guess it went up to, what was that, WrestleMania 33, 34? Maybe 34, I want to say. WrestleMania 34, didn't she lose it to Nia? But up until then, Alexa Bliss was an incredible women's champion. Alexa Bliss was the #1 female star on that roster for a period of time. This was before Becky Lynch turned into Becky Lynch. And this was the rise of Charlotte. But Charlotte had already been handpicked as the woman on that roster, and for good reason. But Alexa, for a period of time, had that position that Becky Lynch ended up taking and, bringing with her to the moon. Alexa Bliss was never a star on the level of Becky Lynch, but she was the biggest star in the women's division. She was a credible champion that beat everybody. And then when she wasn't wrestling, she became that figurehead where I guess she was in charge of the women's division on Raw or whatever. But every time she would pick up a mic, every promo would be money, 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 money. Alexa Bliss is excellent at sports entertaining. She could do both sports and entertainment extremely, extremely well. And I think that that's been forgotten. You just look at Mattel and you don't even realize when they're going over the action figure lineup that they show the new Alexa Bliss figure at Comic-Con. I know because I was hosting the panel. And she comes with the women's tag title and everything, and the figure's awesome, right? But then you realize it's been forever since there was an elite Alexa Bliss figure. And it's not even something that felt like it was lacking because nothing's been done with Alexa Bliss lately. I think there was a collective excitement. I know we talked about it on this podcast when Alexa Bliss showed up in the swamp at Extreme Rules and kind of had the dark veil over her face. Maybe she was Sister Abigail, maybe she wasn't, and was luring Braun Strowman in. They were calling back to the Mixed Match Challenge, which is a very odd thing to call back on. That's when maybe there's not so much history to dive into with the Braun Strowman character, when we have to go back into Mixed Match Challenge on Facebook for references. But nevertheless, she was there, and I think I spoke for a lot of people when I came on this podcast, and I was like, this is what Alexa Bliss needs to be doing. We need to fall into goth Alexa Bliss. Alexa Bliss needs to be in this funhouse. Before the swamp match, well before the swamp match, like a month or two ago, I had said that I think Braun needs to turn. And whether he's the champion or not, he needs to turn and he needs to join the Firefly Funhouse and do Bray Wyatt's bidding. So, twofold. Number one, so there's more interest in the Braun Strowman character. And number two, so that the Fiend doesn't have to wrestle in title matches and cause us to mess up the Fiend. Which I probably don't feel that way anymore. I think I would not be as excited if Braun were to turn now. Just because I like this better. I like Alexa Bliss there. To see that match end on Friday. And it really felt like the end of the show. Nikki shoves Alexa Bliss. Alexa Bliss is sitting on the mat going like, what happened? It felt like that's where this story's going. And I didn't feel special, but it didn't feel bad either. It felt like, okay, like that's what happens in wrestling. There's a tag team, and one of them turns on the other one, and the one can't believe it, and then the one that can't believe it eventually beats the bad one who turned on him, and we keep going from there. And I was like, okay, we're doing a wrestling thing. And then when it goes, boom, 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 and the lights start going out, in the Performance Center, I go, oh my goodness. I cannot believe it. They're going to cash in on this thing. Because it's been 2 weeks, I believe, since Extreme Rules, and no reference to Alexa Bliss being in the swamp has been made. So I'm going like, okay, that was just a thing for that moment. Maybe we'll say, if we want to go deep into canon, maybe we'll say Bray and his demonic, magical ways just got Alexa Bliss to appear for Braun. And that's what that was. And it's like, okay, all right. If that's where you're going, I can understand that. Makes sense. Not the way I would have gone. I would love to see something else, but that's fine. When we realize that it's not that, when we realize, okay, we gave it a week to breathe, and then the next week we come back and we go, wait, maybe there's more to that story than you think. When the lights go out and the red lights come on, and the Fiend, who, by the way, this is the first time we've seen the Fiend. I think he might have come out for Braun Strowman, but we really haven't seen the Fiend much since WrestleMania. The Fiend has not been who's come out since WrestleMania. We watched old school Bray Wyatt in the swamp. We watched sweater Bray Wyatt in the singles match with Braun. So we really haven't seen much of the Fiend since he murdered John Cena to death. So to see him come out and stand behind Alexa Bliss like that, I mean, I think it reminded people how amazing and valuable that Fiend character is. And he looked even bigger than he was before. I mean, I don't know what it is that Bray Wyatt is eating, and I don't know what it is that he is lifting. But that man is enormous. I mean, he looks like he could lift up the entire Performance Center as broad as his shoulders have gotten. He looks amazing. Perfect. He looks like a monster. Like a horror movie monster. Like a guy who, if he kicked in your door and was staring at you, you'd go, oh my God, I'm going to die. You wouldn't go, oh, let me think of ways I could escape this. Oh, maybe I can reason with this guy. Oh, you go, oh my God, I think this is the end of my life. And then you know what? It really would be. You'd be right. Because there's no stopping this guy. So he shows up. He's behind Alexa Bliss. Kind of, squats down next to her. And then he sinks that mandible claw deep. And I did not see that coming either. Sinking the mandible claw deep, I thought maybe he'd caress the face, back of the hand to the cheek. I thought there were a few things he could have done. Mandible claw was not one of them. You don't see that intergender stuff happening very often. And you left going, what does this mean? Now, for me, I feel like that was the Fiend ending Alexa Bliss. Like, when you look at who the Fiend has interacted with, it's changed everybody. It's changed everybody that he's interacted with. I mean, Jerry Lawler disappeared. Mick Foley disappeared. Finn Balor disappeared. We don't really talk about Goldberg. I don't know if... Let me think about it. Did Goldberg and The Fiend ever have a match together? No. I mean, there was that one No. Okay, yep, nope. I've been racking my brain. Goldberg and The Fiend never had a match together, so we won't have to talk about that. But Seth Rollins, look at him. He's a different man. Everybody changes. I feel like the application of the mandible claw was the Fiend using those two Foley fingers to dig out the essence of Alexa Bliss. How's that for a visual for you? To pull them out of her soul and to replace that essence with a darkness. We had a brainstorm meeting for the Hall of Fame level shills on Patreon before this podcast. And one of the conversations that came up is what happens with Alexa Bliss now? Because I think that what inevitably happens when something cool like this occurs in WWE is that some people go like, oh, this is amazing. And then there are others that go like, I mean, everybody goes, this is amazing. There's always a few, idiots that are like, that was dumb. Like, no, it wasn't. No, it wasn't dumb. It was awesome. But even the people who think it was awesome, they go, but I don't know. I don't think they're going to actually do this. What if they do that? What if they do this? There's always people that are pessimistic about it that go like, I'm worried that WWE isn't going to do this, right? And that's fine, I'm not mad at that as a thing where you're like, I'm precautious when it comes to stuff like this. I'm a skeptic. That's fine. I probably don't want any of that negativity near me. I'd rather have some fun and flesh out where this is going to go. The Hall of Fame level Not Sam Shills on our Patreon site got into a Zoom meeting with me before we did this podcast to kind of brainstorm some of the stuff that had been happening. And one of the topics that came up was Alexa Bliss and how what if Alexa Bliss now has this dual personality the way The Fiend and Bray Wyatt have this dual personality, except maybe Alexa Bliss is not as familiar with her darker personality as Bray Wyatt is. Bray Wyatt doesn't pretend to be able to control The Fiend, but he's also not scared of The Fiend. Bray Wyatt is ready for The Fiend to come out at any moment. Maybe Alexa Bliss doesn't know why this is happening and doesn't want her, version of The Fiend to come out, which is a possibility. I think it could get really interesting. Look, I love horror movies, especially like 80s cheeseball horror movies. I love all that stuff. I love slasher flicks. I love all of it. So I'm ready for any of this stuff to happen. For me, I don't like the back and forth. I don't like the duality. I think that that there is a power in Bray Wyatt's duality. That the idea that Bray Wyatt slips in and out of The Fiend, Bray Wyatt in the Funhouse, the fact that he has some kind of control over The Fiend, the fact that he is not always The Fiend, is what allows him to be the leader of that domain. It's what allows him to come across as being this evil genius and not some guy who's tortured by this demon. I think the best thing you can do right now, especially because, like I said, Alexa Bliss has been doing nothing for months. So what is Alexa Bliss right now? I couldn't tell you. I could tell you what Alexa Bliss was a year ago. I could tell you what Alexa Bliss was 2 years ago. But today, I don't know who or what Alexa Bliss is. I don't think it's worth having that duality. I think that you jump in headfirst with this thing. I think that, maybe it is like a Stephanie McMahon, Vince McMahon, Triple H scenario where Stephanie lures her dad in to fight Triple H only to turn on him. That's possible, but I don't think Braun needs to be lured in to fight The Fiend. I wouldn't be shocked. I mean, I guess I could see that. We haven't seen Braun come out of the pond or the lake or the swamp or whatever it was, the body of water that he fell into. So I guess I could see Alexa Bliss being held captive on Smackdown, and that reawakens the monster from the bog. And then Braun Strowman comes back. But in order for that to work out, then you kind of have to put the Universal title back on the Fiend. And then you end up stuck again. And a match that didn't happen before has to not happen again in order to get us back to where we were going before. I think Braun needs to lose that title to somebody else. Personally, I swear to God, I would put this Universal Championship on King Corbin at SummerSlam. I would get away from all this stuff. I would have the Fiend and Alexa Bliss figure out what the Fiend and Alexa Bliss are going to figure out. I don't know what. I mean, you would probably have to go back in time. I don't see how you could get from where we ended Extreme Rules to having Baron Corbin versus Braun Strowman. But I don't know. Maybe the Fiend just refuses the match with Braun Strowman. Or something like that. I don't know. But I would have Baron Corbin versus the Fiend versus Braun Strowman. And I would put the Universal title on Baron Corbin. I would make Baron Corbin the Iron Sheik of the modern era. Which I guess would technically make Braun Strowman the Bob Backlund of the modern era. Which I don't know if that example fits quite as well. But I would have Braun Strowman lose that title to Baron Corbin. And then have Baron Corbin lose the title to somebody else. Somebody that you wouldn't expect. I think it would be either Big E or Matt Riddle or somebody that it's like, whoa, that guy's the champion now? And start going in a brand new direction. You know, I would put the title on somebody young that hasn't had the title before. And I would come off of Baron Corbin. And then I would go back. Like, I think the idea of Braun and The Fiend having a rivalry is great. I just think it gets so complicated and convoluted with that Universal title involved. I think you got to get that Universal title out of there quickly. You know, I wouldn't even be opposed. Like, let's really shake things up. Let's really shake things up. What if Braun were to return next week on SmackDown and be convinced to put the title on the line against Baron Corbin? He's already got Shorty G in his corner. The Fiend shows his ugly head distracting Braun Strowman, allowing Baron Corbin, do a title change on TV. Let's shake things up. Let's do something different. Have Baron Corbin next week on SmackDown win the Universal title from Braun Strowman, go on to SummerSlam and defend the Universal title against Matt Riddle. Can you imagine that? If all of a sudden, you wouldn't be excited for that? If all of a sudden for SummerSlam, you've got Baron Corbin versus Matt Riddle for the Universal Championship? And Braun Strowman versus The Fiend over here? And something going on with Big E where you're like, oh, maybe he's going to get involved? You know, there's just a lot you could do with that. And maybe have Baron Corbin retain the title and have him beat Matt Riddle, only to have Big E at the next pay-per-view beat Baron Corbin, only to have Matt Riddle come back and say, okay, now I want a real shot, and have Matt Riddle versus Big E. There's a lot of possibilities you could go to, but they all depend on getting the Universal Championship off of Braun Strowman, which I think is necessary for this to continue, because I think the money in Braun Strowman right now is this story that he's got with The Fiend and Alexa Bliss. I think that Alexa needs to go full goth. I don't think she has to be Sister Abigail. I don't think that being in The Fiend's corner and being a woman necessarily means you're Sister Abigail. I think you could just be Lexi. You know, if she's just like, Alexa Bliss is gone, I'm just Lexi. And she's, you know, it sounds fun. It sounds friendly. Oh, our buddy Lexi. I'm your friend to the end. Like Chucky. And then she'll tear your jugular out of your throat with her teeth. You know? I think that I mean, speaking of Chucky and Child's Play, I think modeling Alexa Bliss after Tiffany from the later, like the Seed of Chucky and the Bride of Chucky movies, something like that, maybe even put her in a creepy wedding dress or something like that. Put that, maybe a black wedding dress type thing with a black veil over her face. I mean, don't you love the idea of clearly having a horror movie villain in the men's division works in WWE? Alexa Bliss can wrestle. How great would it be if Alexa Bliss was just this little demonic monster that haunted the SmackDown women's division. That's what I want to see. I want to see Alexa Bliss go full Firefly Funhouse, and I want Alexa Bliss and Bray Wyatt to become the Mickey and Mallory of the WWE. I want natural-born killers to come to SmackDown. I just want the men's division to not know what to do about The Fiend and the women's division to not know what to do about Lexi. Horror villains haunting all of SmackDown. And you can keep Bayley with the SmackDown women's title over here and everything. You can keep that all separate. But I want, in short order, Alexa Bliss, full goth, on the side of The Fiend, and just ready to die for him. Ready to end it all. Ready to burn down the house to make sure that their mission is accomplished. And I think Alexa Bliss has it in her. I think that this is the character that we've been waiting to see. I think if this is done right, this is going to bring Alexa Bliss to an entirely new level. I feel like this will be the only thing better than the original Alexa Bliss run. I think it's got money written all over it. I think it's great.